Hello, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, depending on which coast you're calling in from today. We are so glad to have you guys here with us for our pilot episode of HR Table Talk. So glad to see we already have at least 50 people coming in, and that's just the start of today's episode. So we're anticipating quite a few people joining us today. Again, glad you're here. We'll get started in about a minute. Give other people just a chance to join in on the fun and discussion today. We'd actually, while we're waiting for others to join us today, this is actually a really great opportunity to test out the question functionality and then also the chat functionality. So on the right-hand panel of your screen, you can see a couple of tabs. You'll see a questions tab, and then you'll also see a chat tab. Feel free to, if you have questions during today's discussion, we encourage you to place those in the questions tab. We'll address those as we can, as time permits. And then also in the chat tab, if maybe you want to, something resonates with you and you want to share that with the group, we'd love to hear that too. And then we know we have a couple of hundred registrants today, so it'd be kind of fun to hear and kind of see where everyone is calling in from today. So in either the questions tab or the chat functionality, go ahead and just drop in where you're calling in from. I'm sure everyone would love to see, across the different coasts, maybe internationally, some from Canada. So go ahead and drop that in the chat. And then in just another minute here, we'll get started. Awesome. Looks like we've got people from all over. We've got Florida, Kansas City, Massachusetts, North Dakota, North Carolina. Some great interaction here. Perfect. Well, if you have any questions, again, please feel free to drop those in the questions panel or in the chat panel. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. It's 12:02 here Mountain Time. So enjoying this nice weather out here. It's dropping from 85 degrees all of a sudden down to 60. So who knows what to wear, when to wear it at this point in the summer. But again, I'm Jess. Hi, and welcome to HR Table Talk. This is a podcast-style webinar series designed specifically for HR leaders in the SMB space. And we'll be featuring topics from Verified First's HR at the Table webinar series. Again, I'm Jess from Verified First. I help manage partner marketing here, and I'm joined by my colleague, Brianna Rosenkrantz, as well as Eric Seaman and Samir Rahman from Breezy HR. Today, we'll be unwrapping some insights from IBM's global leader of HR reinvention on really what HR reinvention is and what it means for HR leaders in the SMB space. So we're glad again that you could join us. Looking forward to today's discussion. Let's actually get started with some introductions here. Brianna, maybe you can share with us a little bit about what your role looks like at Verified First.
Right. Well, thank you, Jess. I appreciate the introduction here. So as she said, my name is Brianna, and I am the junior content marketer here at Verified First. And I, do all the blogs for the HR at the Table that we have done in the past. I really just help support our team here and get us the marketing recognition. And yeah, so lots of different things. It's hard to boil it down to just one thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you won't toot your own horn, so I'll do it for you. Brianna is really one of the masterminds behind this content that we're actually going to be discussing today. So she combined with a couple of our other team members have really crafted this discussion and geared it toward the SMB space. So I'll toot your horn for you there. Excited to have you on with us today. Eric, thank you so much for joining us. You're on the West Coast. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe what you do at Breezy HR?
Yeah, thanks, Jess. Appreciate it. So I'm the partner development manager here at Breezy. And essentially my job is to help our clients improve their recruiting process. And so I do that by finding great companies to collaborate with to help them achieve that. So it's really great to be working with our friends over at Verify First today to discuss ways that we can help organizations look at and reevaluate how HR fits into helping them achieve their primary organizational goals.
Wonderful. Great to have your insight on today's call. Thank you, Eric. Samir, thank you for joining us in today's discussion as well. What does your role look like at Breezy HR?
Yeah, nice to meet everybody, and thanks for having me on. My name is Samir, and I oversee our customer success and our business development efforts at Breezy HR. So everything from, demoing the product and our ATS all the way through to making sure our existing customers are happy and successful in their recruiting efforts sort of falls under my domain.
Awesome. Thank you, Samir. And just as we get started, a few quick housekeeping items, just so everyone knows on the call, this is being recorded. So thankfully you don't have to have your camera on. You can be comfortable sitting behind the scenes, enjoying and participating in this discussion. So it will be recorded, and we'll be sending that recording to everyone after this discussion. So if by chance you had colleagues that maybe couldn't attend, you find this content interesting, we encourage you to share that with peers and colleagues. And then also, as everyone, or we're kind of in a hybrid workforce right now. So some people are calling in from home, some people are working from the office. So if we do experience any technical difficulties, I think we're all at a place where everyone has experienced some type of technical difficulty or challenge. So we just ask that if that happens, you bear with us and know that we will do our very best to push forward and make sure this is as great of a discussion as we can possibly have today. And just before we really take a deeper dive into today's discussion, I'd be curious to hear from Eric or Samir. What were some of the biggest takeaways from the HR at the Table webinar with Elizabeth Farghese that we had back in January?
Eric, do you want to go first, or do you want me to?
Yeah, no, sure. I'm happy to chime in. So for me, one of the big takeaways was really looking at and re-examining the importance of education and degree in recruitment, and how using technology to code a candidate's relevant skill sets, it's ultimately going to be a better gauge for determining the long-term success of an employee within the organization.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I mean, on my end, what I thought was really interesting was the results of the surveys, some of the surveys at least that were shared. So for example, I think one of the things that Elizabeth alluded to was that 65% of respondents on a survey are not using any sort of AI or machine learning technology within their HR space or process. And I didn't think that was a good or a bad statistic. I just thought that it was an interesting statistic that the vast majority aren't. And to me, it implied that there's still a long way to go in terms of people becoming comfortable using some of these types of technologies to, I guess, reinvent HR in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point and a great metric to really kick off this conversation with today. So I'm glad you brought that off. And then first off, Brianna, we'll go ahead and just jump right in here. Can you recap what HR reinvention is? Because I know that can be such a broad topic, and you're like, there's like 50 different things that you can think of when you talk about HR reinvention. So maybe you can recap what HR reinvention is and really what's driving HR reinvention.
Right, of course. So HR reinvention is this idea that HR is shifting from being that stereotypical cost center to now becoming an organizational decision maker, sitting alongside those executive leaders at the table. HR is really driving those workplace expectations, recruitment and retention initiatives, which is huge because we're now connecting HR's role to the profitability and productivity of the company and the success on return on investment of the talent they find. So really, HR is this keeper of the flame. They're the provider of purpose, and oftentimes they're the first point of contact. So they're really the translator of the organization's mission and purpose. Now, over the last few years, we've seen a couple factors really driving HR reinvention. The first one, it starts at the employee level, right? We have seen a strong demand from employees for a more personalized and customized employee experience that is similar to what they can get at home. The second thing is that organizations are facing strong business disruption, not just because of the pandemic, but we've seen more competition from different industries. We've seen an increase in remote work opportunities. So now we're not only competing with our geographic location, but we're competing with national and international locations as well. So we're really able to tap into those untapped labor markets. Now, in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've really seen how reliant businesses are, or individuals are, on business continuity for the HR role. So this HR role is becoming really pivotal in organizations today. Now, with the pandemic, we've seen the HR reinvention streamline because of a couple factors. The first one is that there is a stronger need for collaboration and innovation in the virtual space. individuals are, studies have shown that individuals who are more engaged in company culture are more productive, which leads to more profits for the company. And it was worrisome as we transitioned to this remote workspace that individuals were still going to be aligned with the organizational mission. So that's something that we had to keep in mind. The second thing is that organizations have had to adopt a new mindset in regards to employee mental health and physical health, as individuals had to face the stress of the pandemic, or maybe they got COVID, or one of their family members received COVID. It's a new consideration that is now going to become the expectation post-pandemic. The third thing is that we have seen a fundamental change in the way work gets done, right? Whether your organization transitioned remotely, or you have taken a hybrid approach, or you were on site the entire time, or you're on site now, those workplace dynamics have completely changed. So for our smaller organizations out there, I'm talking about this HR reinvention, but it might not be the same for your organization or smaller organizations. And it doesn't really have to do with smaller organizations. It really has to do with the sophistication of HR processes, either before the pandemic or adopted during the pandemic. And one of those that is very strong is what Eric and Samir alluded to, was the technology factor. And if these organizations weren't as sophisticated in their technological processes, then HR professionals are really bogged down with those manual, automated, old school, outdated processes. And so ultimately, they might have been experiencing things from COVID that have been heightened, like furloughs or hiring freezes or layoffs, turnover. And so rather than experiencing this HR reinvention, you might have just been bogged down with way more manual processes. So that's something we're going to talk about today too, is how to find that sophistication in your HR strategy.
Yeah, Brianna, those are all great points, and certainly things that we've seen with our clientele as well, in terms of the struggles that they're seeing as a result of COVID, but also just moving forward in how technology is shaping the way that these organizations are working. So Samir, in your experience, what does HR reinvention look like for you?
Yeah, sure. Again, to give some context, we primarily work with and help small to mid-sized businesses, and for us, that can really range from organizations that have 500 employees or less, and oftentimes we're actually dealing with organizations that have 50 employees or less. So within that space, some of the challenges that are faced are possibly a little bit different than what much larger organizations, or some of the organizations that Elizabeth referenced in her sort of webinar might have been talking about. Obviously, there are commonalities regardless of size across HR functions everywhere, but there are some challenges that I feel are unique to the SMB space. And within that, the changes that we sort of see, or the reinvention, if you want to call it that, is really the biggest thing that I've seen there is in terms of what I consider to be the democratization of HR. And what I mean by that is oftentimes we work with organizations where there might not even be someone who's in a dedicated HR role, and it's often people who are hiring managers who are performing many of the roles of HR, recruiting being a very good example of that. So we see key decision makers who are choosing platforms who are going to be hiring managers or CEOs or COOs, because there is no one who's an HR expert in their company potentially. And I think when non-HR personnel look at HR software, their lens is probably a little bit different. And even if I look at my own personal experience working at Breezy in a small company or in a small organization, when I try to look at a platform in trying to decide whether we can use it for something, whether it's an ATS or any other piece of software, one of the first things I try to look for is this a tool that I can sort of pick up and implement quickly without having to go through a huge amount of training? Because a lot of times, especially in smaller organizations, the decision maker is constrained because they have another primary role that they're working on, and they have a lot of bandwidth constraints. And I think we're seeing more and more platforms, whether it's in the recruiting space or any of the other HR related functions, who are designing their products with this in mind, that their consumer is not necessarily going to be someone who's an expert in a particular field, whether it's HR or something else. This obviously doesn't mean that the end user does not want functionality or they're expecting a trade-off in terms of what they can do with the tools or software. But what they're really looking for is a powerful, sophisticated tool that has a very consumer-like experience for themselves and their team. And even for organizations that have dedicated HR teams, a lot of times what we're noticing is these will be very savvy users. They know how to use complex platform, but there is growing demand for making sure that the platforms that they choose and adopt are things that can be easily used by everybody in the organization. And I think Elizabeth touched upon this in her webinar as well, which is HR is slowly but surely moving away from being a fairly siloed department with some very sort of well-defined functions, and that's all they do. And they're moving into a situation where those silos are having to be broken. HR is becoming much more sort of prevalent and pervasive in all aspects of an organization. And in order to do that, you need to be using tools and asking other teams and departments to be able to use tools that are easy to use. So I think this ease of use and making consumer-like experiences for software in the HR field is something that I consider to be a pretty big reinvention compared to like 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that you brought up that point about, Elizabeth's webinar. It was speaking more toward the enterprise level space, those bigger companies, and how there are actually key differentiators between kind of the audience that she was speaking to and what the SMB space looks like, and how there are differences there, but how a lot of the applications and things that she brought up are also super applicable to the small to mid-sized business space as well. So it's interesting to point that out, and I know we'll kind of go into more of that as we progress into this conversation. Brianna, what can and really should HR reinvention look like for small to medium-sized organizations searching for that sophistication that Samir mentioned in their processes?
Right. I mean, there's really two elements of HR reinvention that are really crucial here. And the first one is becoming digitally literate and being engaged in continuous learning. And this is so important because as time goes on, technology is always going to continue to advance, but having those skills that can support that technology advancement in the future is imperative. So with these two elements, reinventing really means embedding into the business, understanding the business requirements, and delivering those delivering those HR services seamlessly to the organization through the technology. And that's really, Samir, where that ease of use really comes into play to help those HR professionals. But before adopting and implementing that technology, it's important that you understand the needs of your business too, to make sure that you're going to use it to its full use. We did a study with Aptitude Research, and they identified that on average, companies have 6 to 10 different technology HR solutions, and not all of them completely understood the functionalities of it. So before adopting and implementing, or replacing for that matter, it's important to consider a few things. The first one is, who's going to be monitoring, maintaining, and testing this program? Who's going to be assessing the outcomes? And does your HR department have the skills and capabilities to support this program? And so that's where it really comes into play on, figuring out the ease of use of these systems that you're going to be adopting.
Yeah, I mean, really great points. And I think the next question, Eric, that I'm going to ask you sort of goes a little bit deeper into this. HR reinvention affects entire organizations. And Eric, my question to you is, what organizational effects do you foresee or have you seen from this shift in responsibility, where it's not just focused in on one department, where it's multiple departments working together?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's certainly something that I think we're going to continue to see moving forward. But organizations, really, if you're wanting to scale into more complex tools and systems, from something that might have been traditionally more manual or basic, one of the first things you're going to really need to focus on is the ability to be able to receive clean and accurate data. So without that, you're not going to be able to do very basic ROI calculations, other KPI measurements, and you're not going to be able to employ, any types of functional AI or machine language-driven processes or automations. That doesn't mean that everyone within the organization suddenly needs to now become a data scientist, but stakeholders do need to understand the importance of the clean data, and HR needs to educate themselves on this and also be the ones that are driving the initiative around this for the rest of the organization. But I should also add, this isn't just an HR challenge. I mean, I'm sure people in other roles are familiar with this problem as well. For instance, if you're in sales and you've worked with a CRM, you can understand if you're not getting good data in, that it can really mess up everything within the process, from forecasting to be able to make sure you're following up on leads in an accurate and qualified time. So, this ties back to something that Elizabeth discussed in her conversation as well. Corporate strategy requires HR's help to get executed, but also HR in turn needs to have buy-in from other departments in order to make it work. So whether a company maybe is entering a new market or launching a new product or focusing maybe more on diversity and inclusion, HR needs to have a strategy around this, and most importantly, be able to communicate the strategy to the rest of the organization and have a tech stack that's built into this, so it allows them a frictionless way to be able to help other departments achieve their goals. So really, long story short, a lot more collaboration around departments is important. Proper tools are essential to that as well. And that really all starts with the ability to be able to receive good and accurate data.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting and key, Eric, that you brought up the concept of cross-departmental buy-in for each of these tools, because when it really comes down to it, at the end of the day, each one of these tools is not going to be affecting just the HR department. It is going to be affecting the entire organization to some degree. So it is super important to have that cross-departmental buy-in as well. Glad you brought that up. Brianna, what apprehensions might businesses have when adopting and really even implementing HR technology?
Right. I think ultimately people struggle to make sense of technology, and that's everybody. That doesn't matter, the level of sophistication of a business. Technology is one of those things where, you wonder, what's this going to do with my data? Especially in the HR role, you're dealing with very sensitive employee information, so you want to make sure that this system's going to be compliant. The second thing is, individuals worry about the implementation factor and what that's going to look like after. I mean, for these smaller organizations investing in HR tech, there is some upfront costs that may be difficult to achieve based on resources available to you. And so really, understanding what that HR technology can do for you is one of those things that is a concern if it's going to be worth the return on investment here. And another thing, for those people who are apprehensive towards adopting that technology, my suggestion is to really understand the technology that you're looking to adopt, and if it's going to support you. Not only if it's going to support you, but if you can support it as well, which again, Samir's point really nailed it in here. Ease of use with HR technology is so important and beneficial. So definitely some considerations to keep in mind when adopting that, but just making sure that you're ready for it and that you understand the needs and requirements of the software.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of HR technology adoption, for those of you in the audience joining us today, we want to be able to incorporate some interaction and engagement here with you today. So we'd be interested to hear from each one of you what this looks like for you, and maybe what types of HR technology you're considering changing within the next 6 months to a year. So I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll here. We'd love to get everyone to participate. And I'll read this poll question out just so everyone knows what exactly they're going to be addressing here. So you should see this pop up on your screen here. What areas of technology are you looking to replace within the next year? And this is one of those where you can select multiple. If only one is relevant, that's fine as well. And the answers we have available today are your ATS, your CRM, background screening solution, assessments, or maybe you're not planning on replacing anything at all. So definitely a very interesting thing here. Looking at these kind of options, Brianna, Samir, or Eric, any kind of initial thoughts, maybe things that, or predictions you might have as to results we could see here?
Samir and Eric, I'll let you take a stab at this. We've been doing this year-long poll study, so I'm curious to see what you think will happen in this.
I'm going to vote for ETS.
I say assessments is, I mean, I'm certainly seeing more and more inquiries about those types of products. So yeah, that gets my vote.
Gotcha. All right, well, we'll go ahead and close this poll. Hopefully everyone has had a chance to vote here today. And we'll just briefly share the results so that we can all take a look at where everyone else in the audience today is coming from. So it looks like the most popular items today people are considering replacing in terms of areas of technology. We're looking at assessments and kind of surprisingly here, no replacements. So interesting to see that given the data we've looked at. I know Elizabeth had mentioned, you know, a lot of people have up to 6 different technologies and platforms that they utilize. So interesting results here.
Yeah, so assessments was high. So Jess, what'd I win?
We'll give you a vacation to Disneyland. There you go.
Oh, okay, good, excellent.
Oh.
So along those lines, Samir, do you have any ideal tech stack that small businesses should start out with on the way to a more sophisticated HR process?
Yeah, sure. I think a pen and a notepad are ideal. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I think there's 2 ways to sort of approach this. Sometimes you're going to have the luxury of saying, I'm working in a company where I have the ability to overhaul or implement a completely new stack. Other times you might be working in an organization where there is already a system in place, and it might be a core system which has multiple components to it. So you might have a payroll system that also has an ATS component to it. It might also plug into an assessment vendor, a background check vendor, and so on and so forth. And it really depends on, you know, what you think is going to happen as the company continues to grow or scale. If you have a core system, then obviously you want to make sure that the core system has each component that is good and something that everybody within the organization likes to use and finds useful. So a lot of times you might see that as a challenge because maybe there is a platform that does really well with payroll, but isn't particularly good on the ATS front, which isn't uncommon. Almost every company ends up specializing in particular pieces of the stack. So there you want to make sure that you're getting a core system that does all the core things the way you want it to, and it should be something that can easily integrate into best of breed or best of class solutions for some of the other things that you might need. If you're lucky enough where you have the ability to go in and just build your entire tech stack top to bottom, then really I would say first prioritize what you think within the HR space is key for you. If payroll is key for you, then that's the first thing you should say is, I'm going to get the best payroll system that I can find. If it's recruiting, then you should say, I'm going to try to get the best ATS that makes sense for this organization. And from there, you sort of start adding in the components. So when you pick the best for any one particular category, the thing that you have to keep in mind is that this tool, because you're not buying an all-in-one system, needs to be able to play very well with other best-in-class products that you might need to plug into it, whether it's a background check vendor, an assessment vendor, an onboarding vendor, an ATS, you name it. So it really varies. If you've already got a core HR stack in there, obviously, you know, you're going to need things like payroll. You're going to want to have an ATS for recruiting. You're going to want to have background checks available. You're going to want to have assessments, but there are very different ways of approaching it depending on what you're inheriting or stepping into. Or again, if you're super lucky and you've got a blank canvas that you can paint on, then pick the one that's the most important function, get the best for that one, and make sure that best one that you chose also plays well with other best of class products in other categories.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so valid and such a good point. I mean, really, when you look at all of these different platforms across the hiring spectrum and, you know, the different tools and utilizations that they offer your company, it is important to make sure that each one of these individual platforms does work well and integrate well with the other pieces and components of your HR tech stack. So that's a really good point, and I'm glad you brought that up. You know, since we're still on the topic of HR technology, really the idea is that HR professionals can reduce and or really eliminate manual processes. That's kind of the hope and desire, I think, for most HR professionals, is to kind of cut down or eliminate entirely those manual processes that can take chunks of time out of your day. So getting that down and kind of automating these processes, it really allows them more time to focus on the value added initiatives, things that really contribute actively to the bottom line within an organization. And part of HR reinvention is really understanding the needs and wants of your employees. You know, one benefit employees want is internal career mobility. Brianna, what does it mean to reskill or upskill?
Right. Well, first of all, I mean, internal career mobility really supports those employees who are looking for purpose, connection, and meaning in their career, which, as I said before, is more important now than ever before. But as companies are finding that they're competing with these different industries, they're starting to realize that they have to infuse their workplace with these skill sets that can compete with them in the future. So that's where reskilling and upskilling really comes into play here. But, you know, when you're reskilling and upskilling, there's some things you want to keep in mind. The first one, which Elizabeth talked about, is figuring out how to decode the work that gets done in your organization into validated skill sets. And she was talking about how, you know, some organizations will no longer require a degree, and it'll be based more on skill sets that are sustainable for the future and that supports the future organizational mission of your organization. The second thing is determining what can we do to provide internal career mobility. Individuals ultimately want to know that when they enter into a company, they have a path that allows them to continue to learn and grow. And so really this stems back to having certain engaged learning programs available that make it so you infuse this learning mindset into your organization, where employees eventually want to reskill and upskill themselves, and you have the programs in place to do that with them. The third thing is, now that you have all this in place, figuring out what those mechanisms or internal career marketplaces are, so individuals within an organization can see what types of other opportunities exist in their organization.
Yeah,
Makes
those
a
are
lot of sense.
all really good points. And you know, again, I think this is an emerging field. I'm looking forward to kind of seeing what tools emerge to help companies be able to do this and move forward with it. So it's going to be an interesting and a big priority for a lot of companies moving forward. So Samir, outside of benefiting the employee, what other benefits does an organization see by reskilling or upskilling their workforce?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's many of them. The ones that really kind of stick out to me in my head, the first one is a super important one, is you have an opportunity to reduce employee churn. And if you reduce employee churn, you're also going to reduce your recruiting costs overall, which is a great thing to do. Reskilled and upskilled employees have institutional knowledge, which is really intangible in a lot of ways, but is vital. So even if they're not experts on day one on a particular skill, or a topic or subject, they may be able to offset that by being more efficient in knowing who to ask for help, or to use some of these adjacent skills that Bree talked about, and their experience to still get the job done. This is by no means me saying that you should never hire new people and just keep upskilling and reskilling your existing employees. Obviously, a lot of times this isn't realistic, but there's obviously, of course, a lot of benefits if you do have a solid reskilling or upskilling program. And the other big thing is really sort of the external perception that sort of starts to develop about your own company. I mean, if you think about it, it's natural. If I work for an organization where every year I'm learning new things, every year I'm taking on new roles, or at least if not every year, frequently doing that, that's awesome. I'm going to talk about that with other people who might not work for your organization, who might be equally motivated by something like this and might be really keen on working with you. So there's definitely a brand sort of benefit as well for something like this.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a good point. That it's not just benefiting the employee on a personal level. It really does benefit the organization as a whole. And I'm glad you brought up the point of it being somewhat of a branding play as well, because, you know, in today's workforce, especially in a remote workforce, the ability for organizations and companies to offer their employees those types of kind of pathways to success, pathways to, you know, whatever career they have in mind moving forward within the company, providing those vital assets and resources to accomplish those things is so crucial and really does stand out in the recruiting and hiring process to prospective employees. So definitely an important thing to bring up here. And as organizations build their own company culture around reskilling and upskilling, what type of HR hiring trends will we see as we continue to face competition from different industries, Brianna? You know, and specifically looking at the SMB space, how can these smaller organizations or mid-sized organizations compete?
Right. There's a few different hiring trends that we're beginning to see. You know, the first one is something we already kind of talked about, and that's the demand for the customized and personalized employee experience. The second one is that we're going to start seeing a more well-rounded approach from organizations in terms of employee well-being and in terms of work-life balance. We're also going to see more of those decoding of skills and less requirements for a degree. We'll also continue to see, you know, as it appears the topic of this discussion is more HR technology supporting HR professionals in their hiring practices. And then also, you know, with the pandemic, we're also going to be seeing more employers willing to be flexible with their work schedules. So when in terms of, you know, these smaller organizations, a couple things that they can participate in to compete with these different organizations is the first one is determining those skill sets for the future and figuring out how you can decode your work in skill sets that can be validated, and then also, you know, figuring out from there, you know, how it's supposed to look and figuring out those adjacent skills here. And then the second thing is figuring out how to improve that employee experience to customize and personalize it. You know, as smaller organizations, you really have a benefit here because of the smaller tight-knit community. You have more of an option to make your employees feel seen and valued and heard. So really, when you're looking at these two things, really focus on, you know, those skill sets of being digitally literate, because that's always going to be a very important skill, and then customizing that employee experience.
Thanks, Bree. Somewhat tied to this, Eric, what are some of the ways you think companies in today's market can compete for talent?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough market right now for any employer, but SMBs in particular. I mean, I've seen time and time again where companies that were kind of already strapped for resources, you know, posting a position and maybe getting 100 applications that they had to go through, and that was a time-consuming process, and could drain a lot from the organization in terms of what they were doing. Well, now it's the economy is starting to pick back up, and people are starting to re-enter the workforce. That same position is maybe receiving 250, 300 applications. So what do you do to you know, make that process work and be more valid, and not take away from the day-to-day processes in helping you kind of achieve your overall company objectives? So, you know, really for SMB companies, they need to be laser focused on their messaging and branding to try to lure qualified talent away from organizations that might be a little bit larger or maybe a little bit more well-known. I think targeting at the top of the funnel via your ATS is kind of primary objective number one. Figure out whether or not you need your hiring to be local, Or if not, expand it. And now, as a result, you've broadened your talent pool. Look at your job descriptions. You know, what Bree was mentioning before, you know, what does that experience look like for the candidate? Are the descriptions inclusive? Are they welcoming? Really hone that down and really focus on those types of things as you're talking, not just about the job, but also about the company in general. And does the description, does it sell the role? And even more importantly, does it sell the company to the job seeker? You know, Elizabeth mentioned in the previous webcasts about identifying adjacent skill sets and not focusing necessarily just on degrees or where somebody graduated from. I think that's real important. And so you'll want to have processes in place to help you identify these skill sets so that you can adequately determine where a candidate might best fit within the organization. And have a simple application form. So when you're asking additional screening questions, you know, make sure they're relevant. Don't ask questions just for the sake of asking them. You know, make sure that they're tied to the position and tied to highlighting the company culture. Be human in the approach and communicate clearly and in a timely fashion, especially to those candidates that you ultimately decide not to move forward with. Again, that talks about the overall experience for the candidates. So really, you need to treat the recruiting initiative as a product and think about how you'd like to sell that product and apply those principles. You'll also want to leverage the power of referrals and have a strong referral process in place so that you're really casting a wide net and being able to, you know, report on and identify those processes that are working best within your recruiting process overall, and really hone in and drill down on those so that you can continue to improve and hone in on those skills.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up the fact of, you know, wanting to simplify these processes, but also incorporate the human element to it. I mean, it was important before the pandemic, but, you know, throughout the pandemic and then even coming out of it, as a lot of the workforce had to transition to strictly virtual or even a hybrid experience. And really even people who are looking for jobs, it's so easy to get lost in the strictly digital space. Everything becomes mechanical, robotic. So it really sets you apart as an organization if you do incorporate that more human, more relatable element to, you know, really every aspect of your organization. So it's a great point. To close us out here, Brianna, can you share with us 5 steps to HR reinvention that small businesses specifically can implement into their strategy, you know, as soon as today?
Right. Well, Elizabeth gave us her amazing 5 steps for HR reinvention. So this one is catered specifically towards the small businesses. And the first one is exploring the art of the possible. And really that means digging into what your needs are as an HR professional for your department. You know, is it technology? You know, what type of technology can you use to support your HR processes? And then if you already have technology, considering, is it working for you? Do you fully understand it? Is your provider helpful? The second thing is understanding what your employees and organization need and want, right? And this really goes in hand with the strong demand for that personalized and customized employee experience. So really, you know, what you should be doing is determining what the employee experience is at each touch point with your company and figuring out how to optimize that to give them the best experience. The third thing is building a business case for HR technology. You know, as you heard in this discussion today, HR technology is so valuable to the HR role because it allows you to automate those processes and spend time focusing on value-added initiatives like your recruitment and retention strategy. So to build a business case for your HR technology, you should be looking into, you know, the needs of your business, what type of technology will work for you, the ease of use, and then connecting that back to the return on investment. You know, looking at the cost, comparing it to your salary, how much time you're wasting with these manual processes, and then take that information and go straight to the executive leadership and connect it right back to return on investment and show them how it's going to support the company's bottom line and success. The fourth thing is something Eric was talking about, is to understand the process and data requirements, and really making sure that before you're adopting this technology, that you know the data that's needed to implement into the system, and that it's clean data as well, so you are working with the right canvas to work with. And the fifth and last thing is to build an implementation roadmap. Determine the tech stack you need, how it's going to support you, and then a rollout plan of how you're going to implement that, and ultimately how it's going to affect you, your organization, and your employees as a whole.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those very actionable insights, Brianna. Definitely something that, if not all 5 implement today, something that you can start step by step. And those are definitely things that can be implemented across any organization, no matter the size. Well, everyone, looks like we're coming up on our time here. Thank you so much, Eric, Samir, Brianna, for joining us today. I feel like we had a really great, insightful discussion around HR reinvention, kind of taking a deeper dive into what that looks like. I'd like to specifically thank Breezy HR for sponsoring today's HR Table Talk. Join us next month as we discuss keys to effectively managing risk for SMBs companies. And then we also have a brief survey. I think there's maybe 3 to 4 questions on it. So super quick, super easy. And we just ask that our attendees here today give us that helpful feedback. That'll help us improve future events and episodes of HR Table Talk. We'd love to hear what you thought, get your feedback. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We're so glad we had this opportunity to discuss what HR reinvention looks like and how you can apply it to your organization. So with that, we'll go ahead and close out today's discussion. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. No, it's Thursday. What day of the week is it? Enjoy the rest of your Thursday, everyone. The weekend cannot come fast enough. Have a great one.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye all.